Hi again. So this is the last part of the day. I hope that you enjoyed the lunch. I'm going to be very brief because we're together only until 3, and I'm sure that the next panel will also trigger lots of good discussions. So I don't think our next moderator really needs to be introduced in front of this audience. But here, please give a warm welcome to Jayati Ghosh. She's professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts. Ooh, that was a weird. Let me do it again. Massachusetts Amherst, and the co-chair of ICRICT.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for staying on till the end. I think we've had 1.5 days of really interesting and intense and illuminating discussions. I certainly have learned a lot, so I really want to congratulate everyone, including ICRICT, of course, but all of us who have organized this. I think this has been fantastic so far. And it's fitting that we're going to close with discussing it with the people who are really deeply involved in seeing this through, the policymakers and the negotiators who are involved in this process at this level. And we're going to get, I hope, in this session, a kind of overview of not just what has happened so far, but the directions in which we would like things to go. So it's great to have you all here. And once again, I don't think this group needs any introduction, but we're very fortunate. We're going to be talking really about in a sense, the way forward based on the recent shifts within the movement at the UN. But it's fair to say that this whole move towards the UN Tax Convention hasn't been all that easy. Yes, it's been quite a bumpy road, and I think many of us are still very surprised that it's happening. And of course, that doesn't mean that the process is done or over. But the G77 countries were always very clear that it has to be a much more inclusive democratic process, but it took a very long time to actually get it through. In fact, even until November, there was a lot of tension. I think many people in the room are aware of this. And in terms of whether or not we would get a consensus on how to operate the process. And many of us feared, in fact, or some of us feared, that maybe the OECD members would actually not want to go along with this, and that there could be these last-minute hiccups and attempts to just change the process altogether or to subvert it. But fortunately, that didn't happen. Fortunately, a consensus was reached. And we now have the position where OECD countries are also engaged definitely in this process. And that's a major, major breakthrough. I think anyone who's been involved in the tax negotiations or discussions around it all these years is very aware of what a breakthrough that is. And so we're particularly fortunate that some OECD members are actually taking a proactive position, and we're very delighted that we have representatives of 2 of the countries that are taking a proactive position on this. We have the State Secretary from Norway, and we have María Fernanda, who is the Deputy Finance Minister of Colombia. And of course, we have Joly, again, who needs no introduction in this group, a very remarkable person who's also been a member of the European Parliament and is a major active advocate for all of the progressive policies that we can think of. I think the role that both OECD and non-OECD countries can play in this is very significant. But it's also clear to us that, let's face it, the OECD, because it has played this dominant role so far, and because so many of the members were in a position to create major stumbling blocks, it's very, very important. And so I'm very delighted to be able to introduce Bjørg Sandkjær, who is the State Secretary of Finance in Norway, to give us our first introduction to this discussion. So if I could request you, please, Honorable Minister, to start.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for that great introduction. So I'm State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, focusing specifically on the development side of things, where this discussion, of course, is very, very important. So let me just start by thanking the Tax Justice Network for the invitation to speak today. Norway really appreciates our excellent cooperation on the important topic of fighting tax evasion and illicit financial flows. Having been involved in this discussion for a while, and I think echoing what we heard from the previous speaker, the current momentum around global tax issues is very promising, and this conference really is a testament to that. We are having a global conversation about taxation as part of an effort to tackle inequality in ways that we haven't had before. And this is noticeable at the UN, where we've just started an exciting process that we expect will lead us to the Framework Convention on Tax. But these issues also are very high on the agenda in the G20, in the OECD, in the World Bank, and other parts of the multilateral system. So before I get into aspects of the UN Framework Convention, I'd like to acknowledge many of the participants and speakers at this conference from civil society, from think tanks, journalists, academia. Without your tireless work and advocacy, we would not have been where we are today. Now, on our part, the link between tax reform and the fight against inequality is central to Norway's development objectives. The same goes for the connection between tax cooperation and mobilizing resources for sustainable development. And we are not the only ones making these connections. These links are made across multilateral fora where tax is being discussed. So to us, the central challenge remains: tax loopholes and illicit financial flows siphon vast resources away from sustainable development and into secrecy jurisdictions. This is happening as the world struggles with dramatic global budget deficits, alarming debt levels, and shrinking fiscal space, all of which are especially detrimental for developing countries. But as you know very well, more than just money, this is also very much about trust. A global tax system that does not effectively stop tax evasion and even rewards those who avoid taxes does not incite trust between tax-paying citizens and their elected leaders. So in the end, trust in democracy and public institutions is at stake. And as we saw in the lead up to the vote to establish the tax convention, it's also about trust between the global South and Western countries, including members of the OECD. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was a major achievement in November last year when countries at the UN adopted the historic resolution to begin the process of establishing a framework convention on tax. So let us remind ourselves that the African proposal for the framework convention was about results and numbers, but it was also about creating an inclusive process around global taxation. So when we consider our way forward, it's important that we continue to hold both of these thoughts in our minds at the same time. So Norway recognizes the clear call for tax reform made by the African group. As one of two Western countries, you may have noticed that Norway took an active stance last November in deciding not to vote against the proposal. Our position was based on a recognition that more needs to be done to maximize the resources, as well as acknowledging that an inclusive process in the UN is an integral part of that effort. During the negotiations last year, we emphasized that we would prefer an examination phase before embarking on negotiations on a legally binding convention. A successful process is one that is centered around accurate assessments of existing frameworks and gaps, current laws, regulations, and practices in national and international tax policy. Now that we are underway, we also see the merit of undertaking such analysis in parallel to the ongoing process, and we have provided input to this effect in the discussions in the ad hoc committee on taxes. So, dear friends, as a country that has been actively supporting the UN's tax committee and other UN tax initiatives for many years, we believe the UN has shown its relevance in raising the level of ambition in global tax matters. There's a real added value to the Framework Convention taking place under the auspices of the UN. That said, we believe it is important that the process that we are about to embark on effectively seeks to bring the OECD and the UN's tax work closer together. The two organizations need to mutually reinforce each other's efforts based on their comparative strengths. Because we would be doing ourselves a great disfavor if we undermine the milestones that have been made in the last 15 years on tax matters in the OECD. The positive steps forward in the OECD in the areas of information exchange and corporate taxation have led to fundamental and historic changes in the international tax framework. And we commit to working to preserve and adding value to the existing frameworks and ensuring greater coordination and complementarity of global processes on taxation. But we do need to be ambitious and to raise the bar for outcomes that benefit all and that are fit for purpose in today's global economy. We believe we now have a golden opportunity to accomplish even better tax coordination on issues that are of transboundary concern. This is the reason why Norway has decided to engage constructively by serving in the bureau of the committee that will draft the terms of reference for the future negotiations of a framework convention. Now, I think none of us hold any illusions that this will be easy. Taxation is about national sovereignty and is by nature sensitive. Conventions are by nature challenging to existing thinking and structures, and challenging the status quo is never easy. But conventions are also powerful tools and important platforms for dialogue and negotiations, for states to address global challenges and to be held accountable. So I am optimistic. There is already now a high level of interest and engagement from stakeholders, and not least from the universal membership at the United Nations. And this is really worth reflecting on. Dear friends, there is a real momentum now, and we would be remiss not to seize this opportunity to create a better and more effectively organized tax system with greater legitimacy and better results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, State Secretary, for these really very inspiring words and very encouraging words, I think, in terms of your emphasis on this constructive engagement and higher level of ambition in the UN committee. Just a quick follow-up question. I know you have to leave very quickly, but just in terms of the approach that you have just outlined that Norway is taking, which we are obviously very happy to hear, do you think there would be other members of the OECD who would be joining you in agreeing to this kind of approach? Let's say other countries in Europe or others who we could perhaps also eventually see as potential allies for a much better global tax justice system.
Thanks for that great question. I mean, reminding us that, of course, we need those strong partnerships to get where we want to get to. Now, I'm mindful, of course, that I can't speak to what my European colleagues will or will not do. But in general, there are some signs that indicate greater involvement from European and other states in the UN process. So I'll make a couple of points. First of all, I think it's worth noting that European OECD countries have been central in raising the level of ambition when it comes to taxation and transparency outcomes in the OECD. I mean, tax evasion and avoidance is, again, a transboundary concern, and Europe does share the world's struggles with closing loopholes. In fact, a recent Tax Justice Network report even reveals that few other regions stand to lose as much from tax evasion as Europe. The documentation shows us how the tax revenue loss from profit shifting by multinational companies deprives European countries of substantial revenue that could be used to fund public services and infrastructure and social programs. So this line of argument is often held in the OECD's work on the two-pillar process, where the rise of digital services has exposed vulnerabilities that really could result in significant revenue losses for European governments. So we believe that's why it's so important that we succeed in delivering in this area in the ongoing Pillar 1 process. And on the issue that I mentioned around trust and inequality, This is as valid for European countries as for any other country globally. So coming from Norway, a European OECD country, I'm just as concerned about tax morale and public confidence in democratic institutions as my neighboring EU countries or Latin American or African counterparts are. And we know that trust is something you have to earn. So unless we make sure that tax systems are fair, progressive, and transparent, we risk undermining our governance systems and alienating our citizens. So the UN may not be a silver bullet, but it can potentially contribute to better organized and effective tax systems that ensures greater legitimacy and buy-in among stakeholders and citizens. And I believe that is really worth our investment. But again, and as you pointed to in your question, I think this must be done in coordination with countries of the OECD. And I think the promise of a genuinely complementary process between the UN and OECD in the tax space could lead more European countries to become even more involved in the UN Convention process. So let me just talk a little bit about the UN process as well, if I may, because as for the ongoing UN process, I think I mentioned briefly that there are already clear signs of interest from many countries to come to the table in drafting the terms of reference. You know that Norway is in the bureau of the Ad hoc Tax Committee, where these terms of references are being discussed. From our region, we are joined by Spain, Italy, and Germany, all actively involved and have nominated high-level experts from their finance ministries to the bureau. And to my knowledge, that's far from commonplace that European finance ministries are present in UN intergovernmental processes, let alone for sensitive issues such as taxation. So this is a very positive step. Let me also add that Norway is currently serving a guest role in the G20 under Brazil's leadership. And as part of the discussions in G20, there is both a reform track and an inequality track, and both of them address tax reform. So there are currently ongoing important discussions in the G20 finance track that link taxation and inequality directly. So just to conclude, we see that wealth tax, corporate taxation, climate taxation, taxation on high net worth individuals are all on the agenda, and both European and other countries are taking active part in the discussion. And I envision that this engagement will trickle into the UN process before long, especially as we move into the substantive discussions around protocols. So I hope I'm right, but we will have to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, State Secretary. That was really very interesting, and we really appreciate that you've taken the time to join us here. Thank you. Good. So could I invite back to the podium? Thanks so much. You know, we already heard just now from the State Secretary of Norway about the nature of that UN process. And it's very interesting that we have OECD members who are also part of the developing world. And we are very fortunate actually to have María Fernanda Valdés here, who is the Deputy Finance Minister of Colombia, who can tell us really how Colombia positions itself in this as part of the OECD, having been actively involved in the OECD process, and now actively championing a much more inclusive process at the UN. So please, María Fernanda.
Thank you, Jayati and the organizers for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today and to meet so many friends, old friends and new friends. What I have today is a presentation consisting of 3 parts. So the first one is about a context. I'm gonna tell you about the PTLAC, the Platform for Taxation in Latin America and the Caribbean. Then I'm gonna tell you a little bit about where Colombia stands in this discussion at the UN. And to end, I will talk about ways to push this agenda forward and what are we thinking about the future from the Colombian perspective. So to start with, I have to talk about the PT LAC. Many of you know this already, but I think I have to tell you all the work that we have been doing with this platform. And I'm gonna start from the beginning, telling you the story, how this idea came from. And I have to say this was an idea that was in the air for many years, because for many of us working in Latin America tax issues, it was quite evident that we didn't have a place, a space to talk about tax issues. And although we had very similar problems, tax problems, we didn't have a space for sharing experiences. And it was also very evident that Latin American countries didn't have a space for talking about international tax issues. So we always looked at the example of Africa, how they go or tend to go united to discussions with unified positions, and we in Latin America were always disorganized, and we didn't have this kind of coordination. So it was quite evident for a long time for us working on tax issues in Latin America, but the idea of creating this platform was an idea, a Colombian idea. It was presented in 2023 in Davos by the president of Colombia and the ex-minister Ocampo, who's also a member of ICRICT. And then soon after this idea came, Brazil and Chile joined, and that's when we started to build this idea of the platform. So the idea of the platform became a reality in July 2023. Many of you went to Cartagena to the summit where we created the platform, and this platform had 4 important objectives. So the idea was that first, it had to be a platform for exchanging practices and experiences. The second objective is to strengthen countries' capacities and expertise. And this is actually the platform has been doing pretty well. We have been having webinars, workshops, so for sharing information, but also for strengthening capacities inside the countries. And the third objective is to keep countries informed about the international discussions. And this is something we have been doing also pretty well. Many countries didn't know very much what was happening at the UN, especially because with the discussions here at the OECD, is more finance ministers are involved, but in what is happening at the UN is more foreign affairs ministers. So we have to do this link between information, and this is something we have been doing very well in the platform. And the last objective, which is more a long-term objective, is to build unified positions. We are not in that situation now. It's really difficult in the region, but still that's another objective we have. And when we created the platform, we had to take the very first decision. And it was, okay, which are the topics that we're gonna focus on in this platform? And we had a discussion with all the members of the countries, and the result of the discussion is that there were 4 issues that were relevant for the region. The first one is the progressive taxation, which is not a surprise in a region that is the most unequal on the planet, with many of the most unequal countries in the planet seated there talking about this. So this is not a surprise. We also had another priority issue, which is the environmental taxation. This is something Colombia pushed very hard in the discussion and got into this priority selection. The third is the digital taxation, and the last one, tax benefits. Tax benefits was a proposal mainly from Caribbean and Central American countries where tax benefits are an issue. So we also had to decide about the governance of the PT-LAC. And we decided that this had to be a bottom-up approach, governance, kind of governance, where at the bottom we have 2 advisory groups. one from the civil society that has been involved in all the process, and another one from the private sector. So they give proposal to the other group, which is the working groups. We have working groups on each of the 4 topics that we selected the first day of the PTLAC. And also we are supposed to have ministerial meetings. Ministerial meetings. We only had once already, but we are supposed to have one in May as well. And this is how the process is. So with this, I just wanted to start telling you that we have this platform in Latin America and the Caribbean that is really relevant to understand what is happening at the discussions at the UN. And now I'm going to continue telling you a little bit about where Colombia stands in all this discussion. And as Jayati was saying, we have a strategic role in the discussions. We, Colombia, we are on the one hand a developing country. We are part of the G24. We are part of the G77. Since last year, we are part of the South Center. So we are a developing country, and we definitely understand the concerns of the global South. But on the other hand, we are also an OECD country. And that means that we are in the discussions, and we have been very active in the discussions. We are even part of the steering committee in the discussions at the OECD. And we believe that our role in the discussion at the UN is to be a bridge that brings together those 2 worlds that are so difficult to put together somehow, because we understand that there are good things from the OECD process that we have to bring to the UN, but also we have to ensure that what is happening at the UN is on the benefit of global South countries. So this is the role, and this is how we look at this. And Colombia has been very, very clear in its position. And here is the slide that can capture all our points of view. So firstly, we believe, and we have been vocal about this everywhere, that the UN is the most legitimate place to hold universal and legally binding discussions on tax matters. We also believe that the agenda setting process that we have at the UN ensures that the global South can be best represented at the UN. So the agenda setting process is the one we want to support. And we also hold that a legally binding instrument can avoid previous mistakes. And we hold as well that a framework convention is a necessary and useful instrument for both companies and also individuals. So along with most countries of the region, we supported strongly the African resolution on tax issues. So now, what are we looking this process going forward? So we have to present today our inputs to the discussion, and we have been having meetings with many actors on this. And we believe that this is an important, that this is a window that is opening for many opportunities to work for a better and the best possible scenario of tax cooperation among countries. So we see ourselves as leaders in this process. We are not leaders because someone told us to be leaders. We took the position of being a leader and trying to work to make it work. So we are now in this moment member of the bureau. We are also rapporteurs in the process. And Colombia hopes to continue consensus among the different views that I already mentioned. And also, we are looking to help Latin American, Caribbean countries to be always informed and coordinated for the discussions. And how are we doing as Colombia this? So first, we have the group of countries of Latin America and the Caribbean in the UN in New York. And we are coordinating with them, meeting with them, so we can build information, also build consensus. But at the same time, we are using the platform of PTLAC to send information, to have workshops, webinars, whatever we can, so we can take all the information that we have, bring it to all the countries in Latin America. And we are also hoping and pushing for making all the 4 PTLAC priority topics to bring it to the agenda at the UN. And now, with this input that we are gonna send today, I'm gonna give you a little message of what we are gonna send. So we have to take mainly 2 decisions. We have to send inputs about 2 topics. The first one is the topics of decision making. And this was a huge discussion at the UN, this discussion between consensus or voting, that I think many of you know that was part of the central part of the tension in the discussions in February in New York. So our idea, which was actually the one we gave that in the discussion, was that all efforts should be made to achieve consensus. Of course, we like consensus, and the UN, they like consensus. But if we cannot reach consensus, we go to voting. So this is something we are sending today in our inputs. Another thing is that we consider that the terms of reference should establish a conference of the parties. And in that conference of the parties is where new issues of taxation are gonna come, and we're gonna discuss and take decisions. Taxation is really something that's changing so fast, as we all know. There should be a conference of the parties to discuss new issues coming to the discussions. We can think about many, but for example, artificial intelligence. How are we going to deal with that? Okay, we open a COP, and we go there and we discuss how we're going to work on that. Also, we believe that the TORs should announce the establishment of a secretariat. And we think it should be a strong one that actually brings all the technical assistance, does all the housekeeping of the process, and also help us to draft documents, because we need, in the discussion, we talk in a language, economic language sometimes, and we need to pass it to legal terms. So we need that work. And finally, we also need we need funding. We need funding for developing countries. And in that also, we were very, very vocal at the UN meetings that without that, we cannot ensure that this is a democratic process, especially if the meetings are gonna be there in New York for long periods of time. Probably Colombia has the budget for going there and discussing, but we are sure that many developing and least developing countries do not have the capacity to send people to New York for so many, even weeks. So we are also sending that in the inputs for the terms of reference. But also we need to talk about substantial matters. That's how lawyers like to call it, substantial matters. And with this, we are sending inputs saying that we have to put inequalities at the center of the discussions. So we need to really go into inequality. This is something not only Colombia is bringing to the agenda, but also other Latin American countries are pushing really much on inequality issues. So in this part, the substantial issues that we want to bring is that we need urgent, detailed commitments on taxation of high net worth and ultra high net worth individual. That's the first one. Non-Peruvian tax measures to finance climate action. And here is very clear, this non-Peruvian, because we really believe that we need taxation to finance climate action. And thus, taxes, Peruvian taxes, are meant not to generate revenue, right? So, and we need revenue to fight climate action. So we are thinking about something different, and it's important that we put it there. Also, we need measures to curb illicit financial flows. This is something we decided to add to our inputs after the discussions with Africa. So we decided to support this topic that for them is so important and has been so important for many years. And also we added taxation of services and tax incentives. As you see, we added all the agenda from PTLAC. We added the priorities of Africa, and we put it together and we bring it as an input from the Colombian government. And this is just to conclude, we think that Colombia, through PTLAC, but also in our work as a country, we are leading the discussion and we are really proud of it. The Framework Convention is a big opportunity to change things. And we think this is also an opportunity to work in the interest of the global South. And we should include progressive and non-Peruvian environmental tax measures to fund climate action. And this is all of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, María Fernanda. What a wonderful combination of idealistic and practical that was. I mean, really. So, I just want to pick up one point that you mentioned, that pyramid you described in terms of the procedural way that your PTLAC is. PTLAC is an inspiration to many of us across the world, I have to say. Certainly in Asia, we really envy you for even having started this. But it's also that the process that you outlined is already inclusive in the sense of getting civil society representation and getting different voices to even talk about the issues that have to be discussed and provide inputs to the working groups. I'm wondering if you think this is something that could be carried forward in the UN negotiations, and what you would suggest for other regions that are also trying to do some kind of cooperation along tax matters.
I think the system that we created with the PTLAC is really is working pretty well, and it's working in many aspects. For instance, because we always consult civil society for what we're gonna do, we get lots of inputs from the civil society, and those inputs they help us to build the inputs and send them to other stances. For instance, the UN. So it's very good, because also we had at the PTLAC, it's like a preparatory field for working on this on the issues that we then need to bring them to another stance, more international stance. So the civil society has been very useful for bringing ideas, concepts, and this is really, really important for the process. But I also think the civil society has helped in many other ways. For example, this communication between our countries with Africa has been all possible because of the civil society. So they have been the connectors of the countries, not our diplomatic missions, which is the regular way, right? So it's more related to the help and the assistance of the civil society, and they also pushing us to meeting with other people from other countries. And that's so interesting what they have been doing. So I think it's a system that has been working. I think it's gonna work. And of course, I think we should continue giving inspiration to other processes to adopt the same system, where the civil society, and in a lesser extent, I have to say the private sector, because they have been there, but the civil society is much more active. Yes, in this topic. So they have been really pushing. So definitely, I think it's an example to follow in other processes in Europe or any other country.
Great, thank you. So we now move on to Eva Joly. You know, I have to say, one of the pleasures of this conference has been the number of all-women panels. Not because they're all women, they just happen to be the best, right? So it's great. I mean, but also, so it is actually really a particular pleasure to introduce an iconic woman, Eva Joly, who, as you all know, has been a Green MEP and is generally an inspiration on many fronts. So please go ahead, Eva.
No, I don't have a presentation. I am very old-fashioned. Yes. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and to have assisted in these 2 days, tremendous energetic discussions. And I'm very optimistic for the future. I want to give you a historical reference because, as you see, I'm an old woman. And I have been around for a very long time. And I negotiated for Norway with others in 2002 and 2003, the UN Convention on Corruption. And this is relevant to our problematic because we had an OECD Convention on Corruption before, from 1977. But as we say in French, there is not a picture. The UN Convention is unbelievably better. It has instruments that the OECD Convention didn't have. And today, nobody are using the the OECD Convention anymore because we have the UN Convention. And I want to say that this convention was negotiated very quickly. I think we started in 2000 and it was finished by the 8th of December 2003. So we made a tremendous progress in the fight against corruption in less than 3 years. So I think we could do this UN tax convention also very quickly because the matter is urgent. I think the world cannot wait anymore. It has taken all too long. The OECD agreement that was signed in 21, they started in 13, you remember? And all this time has been lost for the public financing because the system is totally broken. It has been broken for decades and the new convention do not repair it. I want to take one example to share. This institution, the Paris School of Economics, they have established very important studies and they have put figures on what it means, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. What does it mean in dollars? And they made it per country. You know that in Pillar 1, it is a small part of the benefits of the very big multinationals, those who have more than 750 billion in turnover. And they have to make 10% profit first, and then it's 25% of what is over that. And then you have double taxation and all these issues. So, and the countries has to give in their proper rights of taxation of digital economy. So let's look to Nigeria, for instance. They will get from this new system $49 million. Today, they have a 6% tax on the digital economy. The Nigerian digital economy has a value of about $100 billion. So they are losing, if they agreed to this system, 5,999,961. So, so it don't work. I think we can say that. But there is one good thing or two good things in it, and the best with this convention is the unitary taxation. And here I will share with you some souvenirs, because I'm not an academic and I learned things the hard way, in a way. I did development with Norway in some years, from 2002 till 2009. And I worked with Zambia. Zambia happens to be the third biggest producer of copper in the world. And with a young economist, we looked into the contracts of the mining companies and what Zambia got out of it. And at that time, the revenue they had from the copper mines was $50 million at that time. The turnover of the mines was 3 billion. And then after a process with the government and the parliament, it was decided that the contracts were too bad. Because these companies, they exported the copper to Mauritius, and the benefit was made in Mauritius, who sold the copper to the final client. Very classic example of transfer pricing. So this is the way nothing was left in Zambia on the mining industry. It is the same thing for Mali, for instance, and everybody knows the problems Mali have. They have gold mines, and these gold mines are only bringing them some 1.5% income of the mining industry, which is peanuts. I can tell you that Norway is getting from their mining resources some 67%. But when we started doing this work in Zambia or in Mali, we were told by the World Bank that we did disturb the investing climate. So it was normal for a lot of people that these countries should have that low outcome of their taxes. So you see, the system was broken and it is broken. So we have to change the bracket, and it must happen quickly, because we are facing such huge challenges that needs financing. And I believe that this is possible if we keep it simple. I think we cannot solve all the problems of the world in this convention. And we must, if you create a court, for instance, that will take, in my opinion, 15 or 20 years. We don't have that time. So we should focus on taxes, because with money coming from taxes, the countries can take care of human rights, can take care of health. So it must be simple. And in the guidelines, in what we believe in the Commission, is that, excuse me, we should really change the taxing rights and get rid of all the transfer price issues due to all the subsidiaries. Do you know how many subsidiaries a company like Veolia has, or a bank like BNP? BNP has nearly 200 subsidiaries, and Veolia has 160 or something. All these subsidiaries are there for tax purposes, most of them. So we have to get rid of this system by taxing where the activity takes place, having very criteria that are just, that everybody can understand. We don't need 200,000 tax lawyers to advise. We do not. If we have a simple criteria, like we tax globally the company, and we have an apportionment due to a formula, and this formula could be sales and investment in physical assets and salaries. So that would give much more rights, taxing rights to developing countries than today, when the taxing rights are linked to property. And also there are really absurd things like permanent presence of companies that is needed today, giving results like Google don't have a fiscal presence in France because their invoices are being emitted from Ireland, in spite of the fact that they have hundreds of square meters, a lot of salaries, and a lot of salaries paid. So all this can be settled. We know everything, and that's the good thing. So much research, so much good knowledge. We know everything. And this is why we now are able to choose good criteria to make more balance in the system. And we will do it quickly. And you can count you can count upon this commission. And I think all this platform, all the people that are here. So I think we should say good luck to each other, and that we will meet again maybe in 3 years, and that we will have this convention. Bye-bye.
So Eva, you ended on such a happy note, but I want to ask you a little bit of a not such a happy question. You have such long experience working even in Europe, and you've been witness to all the failures of the European countries to address these basic issues of illicit financial flows, tax avoidance, etc. So how optimistic are you that European countries are going to seize this moment now?
Well, let's listen to what the Norwegian State Secretary said. She said Norway is in, and Italy, Spain, they are important countries. And I think this is the beginning, because the public opinion in all European countries, now they have understood and they know what it's all about. So that gives a counter power to the capital and to the multinationals. I must say that they are very strong. There will be a lot of resistance, but the only way to move forward is with the public opinion and in the UN, I believe.
Great, thank you. Okay, I know everybody must be really tired after so much energy and passion being expended over the last 1.5 days, but we have, I think, 15 minutes for some questions, if there are any from the audience. So if you want to, I can see one hand right now here in the middle, and then in the back in the red, and Pierre. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, María Fernanda. Yes, one question.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, it's Marcelo Justo from Justicia Impositiva Tax Justice Network podcast in Spanish. Oh, Marcelo Justo from Justicia Impositiva Tax Justice Network podcast in Spanish. Yeah, it's basically, you mentioned that it still is kind of the unified position of the Latin American countries is for the time being like a dream. But at the same time, I suppose that you're working into it, and there must be quite a group of countries that are already in the same, let's say, venue. So the question is, how many countries are in that venue? Will they be able to get a kind of unified position by the time of the convention? And, how many countries will be out of it? I anticipate that Argentina will be out of it with Javier Milei for the time being. Let's hope Javier Milei is not there for long, but, let's talk about just reality for the time being.
Okay, then in the back there, in the left. Okay, and we'll take 3 questions first, and then the next 3. Is that okay?
Hi, my name is Gina Cortez Valderrama. I am here with the Feminist Action Nexus for Economic Justice, as well with the Women and Gender Constituency, part of the UNFCCC. And my question goes related, thank you so much, first of all, for the panel and for the conversation. Also, being Colombian, I'm also very proud about the platform. I'm happy to have you here, Maria. Also want to follow up on the question that was posed before. At least in the UNFCCC, in the convention, what we have seen is that there is a way in which civil society can more directly do advocacy and be represented in the space beyond the advocacy work that we might have bilaterally with governments, and how we have seen as constituencies, and particularly for right holder constituencies such as women and gender groups, to be able to bring and push for their collective demands that speak on regional collective work, no, those collective rights that we want to see as well being delivered in the framework. So my question is there already any proposal, concrete proposal in the TORs, so that there is an official sitting representation for the civil society groups, and how do you foresee this being? How would be as well this mechanism? Because we have seen as well that it has been a very effective mode for us in the climate space to guarantee accountability, do monitoring, how we can build up those relationships, and as well provide more valuable insights in the space, in this party-driven process, no? Because conventions are party-driven process.
Thank you. A question for Eva. It's a minor question, actually. I was just wondering about the circumstances around the negotiation of the UN Convention on Corruption, because it was just after 9/11. And to what extent do you think that this influenced the momentum for this? Because, I mean, right now, I don't see a similar event, at least not in the advanced countries or in the global north. So just if you can comment on this.
Okay, interesting. So shall we, María, do you want to start?
So Marcelo, about your question, I said we are still far away from unified positions, mainly because the PTLAC has only 8 members. So not all Latin American countries are members of the PTLAC, although many participate in the meetings and in the workshops. So many are not there. You mentioned, for instance, Argentina. They are not part. They were not part even before the Milei government. We send the invitation. We really push, but they haven't accepted to be part of it. So the countries that are part of the PTLAC, we tend to work pretty much. We share many ideas, and I see possible that one day we reach the dream of unified positions. But for having a unified position of Latin America and the Caribbean, we need more countries. And this is a process we have been trying to put forward, and is the addition of new countries. So 8 is okay for us for starting, but we need much more. And the other question that I forgot your name, from Colombia. Gina, I forgot your name, Gina. Yes, in fact, in the meetings we had in New York in February, we discussed 2 annexes. One was on the participation of third parties, other people different than the representatives from the countries. And there was one of those that was one that passed without any discussion. So in fact, there is room for civil society, and no countries had any objection about it. So we didn't discuss it because everyone agreed. So there is a place for that. I think that's positive also in the process in the UN, like civil society is also is part of it, not only in this case, but in general. Yes.
You're right. September 11, 2001 changed a lot of things in the world. But the negotiations were already ongoing, and we had a very good secretariat that had been put up before. And I think that September 11 was especially important as to money laundering, and you saw it in the FATF setting very much, where all of a sudden it was only money laundering and the risk of financing terrorism that was important. Maybe it has also affected the end of the negotiations, because what this convention did give the world was a universal instrument of extradition, a much wider definition of corruption, of economic crimes. So I think there was, at that time, it was really a political will to fight corruption. So, and I think today there is a need for money. We have so much to cope with. We have so much, especially the energy transition. It need huge investment all over. So I think the need is there, and the European countries are also losing a lot of money to tax havens, and this is one of the mysteries I must tell. The European Union tried to put in place a global taxation. It was the same day as today. It was the 15th of March 2018. The Parliament voted the CCCTB, the Common Corporate Consolidated Tax Basis. And this has been a huge work, lot of work. And it was voted with a huge majority. And then it should go through the states. Most of the European states were in favor. But in tax matters, you need unanimity. And the tax havens are small states. Luxembourg, I don't know exactly how many they are. They are 100,000, they are not even a million. And that is also true for Malta or Chypre. And they have small population, small economy. And there is a possibility in the convention, which is Article 16. You can circumvent the unanimity if there is a competition issue. And I think it's possible. It was possible to consider that this tax possibility not to pay taxes because you have a tax agreement with Luxembourg is also a competition issue. They could have tried. It had never been used, but at that time, the commission was headed by Jean-Claude Juncker from Luxembourg. And as you know, Luxembourg is not a country. It's the home of multinationals. And it is there for the multinationals. And that gives Luxembourg the highest income in the world. And they will not give in on it. And so this is weakness. And also it was the weakness of the other commissioners. It was a French commissioner of tax. He could have tried, he didn't. So you see, we were stopped. And we were stopped by the tax havens that are doing so much harm to the world. And we have never made a study of what did Chypre means for the possibility of the oligarchs to build up their tremendous fortune. What was the role of Chypre for the Putin's palace that we see in the Navalny film? Huh? Yes, but this is too important.
No, I agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah. So we have the final round of questions here. Dereje in the back. Okay, 4 questions to close. Yes? Okay.
Thank you. Well, Eva, I'm going to give you an opportunity to come right back in on that train of thought. I'm Conor O'Neill. I'm the head of policy in Christian Aid Ireland and part of Financial Justice Ireland. And sometimes when our small movement for tax justice in Ireland is campaigning, it feels like we're in the belly of the beast a little bit. And I wonder, based on those reflections on the common tax base and other EU initiatives, do any of the members of the panel have any advice for those of us in countries like Ireland or the Netherlands or Luxembourg? Should we keep making the moral argument that we have done, that the regimes we help facilitate are imposing terrible costs on the global south and the rest of the world? Would we be better served trying to find some economic argument that maybe the losses that are heralded are not so great, that we can do this at UN level and everybody wins? I'd be interested in your reflections, having watched the EU level debates where those small countries have managed to block reform of this area. And thanks again for the brilliant discussion.
Thanks. There's somebody right in front. If you could just, yeah, there you go. Just, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Florian Schatz. I work for the German Development Corporation. And I just wanted to ask about quick wins. So we've heard during the last 2 days, I think, a lot of great proposals, for issues that could be tackled as protocols, etc., under the new UN Framework Convention. For example, we heard about wealth taxes, about inheritance taxes, about exit taxes, about higher minimum corporate taxes, especially for fossil fuel industries, etc., etc., or the excess profit tax from Ines, which I thought very interesting. And I was wondering, as Eva said, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have time to lose. And of course, most of us in the room, we probably want all of these issues to be tackled. But from a strategic point of view, what do you think could be a quick win? What do you think we should try to push first as a protocol? Maybe something that is not that complicated, where there's not that much opposition, to have a quick win and then continue with other issues. That would be interesting from the whole panel to get your views on potential quick wins. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so then Dereje here, and there was in the back there. Yeah. So.
Thank you. I'm a bit worried about this concept of complementarity, which was raised by the Norwegian state secretary. I'm saying this. Oligarchy cannot be democratized. So the OECD remains, oligarchy cannot be democratized, OECD remains an oligarchy. So now, is it when you say complementarity, is it by recognizing jurisdiction for the OECD on certain parts of international tax, or it is about bringing in its technical expertise into the process? If it is bringing its technical expertise into the global negotiation process, I would not have a problem with it. I hope OECD would have suggested submitted now to the submissions required by the UN process. But if I'm told OECD has started working on corporate income tax, global corporate income tax, it should not go to the OECD. It is about giving OECD an illegitimate jurisdiction over international tax issues. So this issue of complementarity should be qualified if it is about giving jurisdiction to an oligarchy or giving it a role to play in technical solution of problems.
Thanks, Dereje. That's a very important point. And then final question today. Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm Florian Dierich, just a student working on international taxation. Two minor questions I want to ask. The first one is, what do you think about the long term, like once the convention is set up and the substantial work can begin? I think, Mrs. Valdés, you proposed a few ideas already. Like, what should be the next big project? Like, is it now a minimum tax for billionaires, or is it now carbon taxation? Or what wasn't in the list is like, what will we do with Amount A once it has failed? Or should we take over Globe again and the minimum tax because there's so much frustration about it? So I'm just curious about what you think is strategic and politically feasible, and what should be the next thing. Like, what is ICRICT now going to say? What do they want now? What's the next big thing? And then maybe a second minor question is maybe then on voting. I think now for the TOR, it's got to be simple majority voting. But how do you see it going forward? Because, I mean, I just for having a feeling also maybe for the floor, how big is the frustration? Like, will non-OECD countries try to get consensus, or like, how do you align with getting everyone on board in the same time having simple majority voting and being able to get forward, but not having anyone on board? Like, what's the solution there? Maybe just...
I think I will go first because I only have few questions related to my presentation. So one question from Ireland was which is the message we should give to those countries that somehow depend of an unfair international tax system. And I don't have, of course, the answer, but something that has worked pretty much in Colombia in our discussions is trying to show that the actual system is unfair to everyone. It's not only, there are no winners. I mean, there are winners, but we know who they are, not country winners. And so I think is try to create this idea and try to link it with other disasters and problems that we have in the world. For instance, migration, for instance, the climate crisis, or the risk of war, for instance. So there is a way, a narrative that we have to build to show that this is a system that is unfair for everyone and every country. And the other question that I think it was from somewhere there was related to which is the next step. Okay, up there. Which is the next step, which is the protocol that we have to follow, continue to get initial wins in this process. And I think it's too early to know. We are receiving all the inputs from all the countries. And once we get all the inputs, we are going to see which are the issues that are more popular around all the countries. And in that way, that should be our next step, to try to push for those popular topics. I hope some of the ones we brought to the discussions in Colombia are there in that list. Probably illicit financial flows, probably something related to inequality or climate taxation. I hope so.
For me, when I say that we can build on the OECD Convention, it means that if we were able to obtain a global taxation here, we should be able to obtain it also within the UN. I mean, we should not start that discussion all over. We should go directly to unitary taxation and then discuss on which criteria we should give each and every country taxing rights. This is probably a diplomatic issue for some countries, but I think that there will be a lot of goodwill from countries that who understands that these tremendous inequalities between the North and the South and between rich and poor people, that this school is a specialist on. A lot of people understands that this cannot go on and that the taxing system is part of this inequality because it reinforces them. So I think there is a public opinion, there is a political will, and that the UN is much stronger, has much more legitimacy than the OECD, and that we have that moment now. But it will not last forever. So I think it's urgent. We have to act now and during a short, 2 years, 3 years. Are there low-hanging fruits? Yes, I believe there are low-hanging fruit, as Gabriel Zuckman told us. Taxing the billionaires brings in as much money on 2% tax on flow and stocks as we hope to get from the corporate taxation. It's about the same amount. So this is a low-hanging fruit. Also a low-hanging fruit, and that countries can do on their own, to put on exit taxes. Okay, you are leaving Norway. That's a speciality right now. Rich people are leaving Norway. They built up their fortune there, you know, with the salmon and everything. But now they decided they don't want to pay the 2% taxes on wealth that Norway has installed. and they are leaving for Switzerland, and they're giving a lot of interviews telling what a perfect contract. So I think that's something that Norway could fix all alone. And so that is something that each of us can work on. Yes, so I think we should follow all the researches that is being done and go for the low-hanging fruits. It can be done by each country alone. It can be done by association of country that volunteers, by waiting for the UN Convention to happen.
Thank you so much, both of you. You know, this has been such a rich discussion. I'm not even going to try to summarize it, but I want to just pick up on a couple of the issues that have been raised very briefly. I promise I won't keep you for more than 5 minutes. Okay. No, to Dereje's point, I do have a lot of sympathy with what Dereje is saying, because I think all of us are concerned that, you know, suddenly the entire repository of wisdom and technical expertise on taxation is with the OECD, and nothing can be done without that. I think we really have to get out of that. The OECD is a country grouping. Okay, oligarchy, whatever, it's a country grouping. So just like the African group is a country grouping, just like PT-LAC is a country grouping. And yes, they have done a lot of work, and definitely we should take advantage of all the work that has been done. Just as the IMF has been doing a lot of work on taxation recently, and there is a lot of expertise there, but they are not the repositories of all expertise, I think. And certainly we also have to remember that technical expertise never comes, shall we say, without a normative background. There is always a perception of your context, a perception of your basic interest, and a political economy even behind any so-called technical knowledge. And I think those of us who are economists in this room know that very well. There is no economics without some politics, whether it's stated or not. So I think we have to recognize that the OECD has played a role, certainly in bringing up these issues, the 2 pillars. I mean, I think let's move beyond that idea of the pillar business. It hasn't worked. Didn't work in the WTO for sure. Hasn't worked in the OECD. But the idea of unitary taxation, the idea of a minimum corporate tax, yes, it took them up. There were things wanting. Let's build on the fact that it was taken up, and we know now what was wanting, what were the gaps, what were the frailties, and so on. So I think we have to see the UN process not as starting anew, definitely building on the expertise created, but building on all the expertise created without thinking that all of it comes from a particular building in Paris. Not this one. This one is wonderful. Yeah. In terms of, you know, how do you get every country on board? And here, I think it was wonderful the way María Fernanda expressed it. Yes, of course, we want consensus. That's the ideal. We also know that it's a very geopolitically and otherwise divided world, and there will always be the outliers who will object. I think the beauty of the tax discussion, and why it's the only one really where there is this positive momentum going, is that ultimately it's not a deal breaker if any one country, big or small, stays out of it. Whether it's the US or it's Luxembourg, it's not a deal breaker if it stays out, if enough countries are actually working together. Because tax is a very different thing from, let's say, you know, the debt discussions, where yes, the creditors have a very big say. And so I think we have to recognize this. We have to recognize that in the international tax negotiations, all countries, developing countries, will have a much greater voice, not only because suddenly there's a UN framework and it has a different protocol and process and so on, but also because you are in larger groups, you have more involved, and therefore your bargaining power necessarily gets magnified. So recognizing that, I think, gives all of us a bigger possibility of dreaming big. A lot of the discussion has been dreaming big in all kinds of ways and thinking of new types of taxes that could be implemented relatively easy in the last 2 days. I think this is really one of those carpe diem moments where you can actually mobilize to effect change. And it doesn't matter who wins in November in the United States. It doesn't matter if you've got Milei in Argentina. It doesn't matter if you've got these tax havens who are going to resist everything to the end, because there is sufficient power in the others to actually force major changes in the global tax system, where it will not be in the interests of any country or any jurisdiction to continue the way things have been. So yes, it is broken. Yes, we can fix it. And I think this is the only area of global international multilateralism where I actually do see genuine hope. So let's actually make sure that hope happens. Yeah, thanks.